On June 22nd, 2025, the world held its breath as the US B-2 bombers rode towards Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. After the strikes, Trump declared the sites completely obliterated. Netanyahu cheered, praising Trump as a savior of Israeli security. But the satellite images told a different story, and further revelations showed an even more shocking tale. So let's unpack it all and look at the ramifications of what has happened. Welcome to the Drishtikone Show, where we go beyond the noise, pierce through the propaganda, and expose the phenomena and actions that others are too afraid to touch or approach. This is not just about politics, you see, it's about rediscovering the truth. So today we unpack one of the most audacious, contradictory, and potentially disastrous gambits in modern politics. Trump's June 2025 strikes on Iran and the secret billion-dollar backchannel deal that followed. And this may haunt America's alliances for decades to come. And this follows the crypto betrayal in Pakistan for India as well. So before we start an analysis, I want to share an insight into Iran's internal workings that no one seems to be discussing. Did you know that Iran has two distinct armed forces that compete with each other? Iran's armed forces report directly to the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, and consist of three main branches, the IRGC, or the Revolutionary Guards, and Artesh, and finally, the Law Enforcement Command, or the LEC. The command and coordination flow through two key entities, the Armed Forces General Staff, or the AFGS, which handles the strategic guidance and military policy, functioning very similarly to the US Joint Chief of Staff, or the Indian CDS, and the Khatam ol Anbiya Central Headquarters, responsible for joint and wartime operations, for which US or India have no direct equivalent. Instead of a unified wartime command like Khatam ol Anbiya, the US operational chain runs from the defense of the Secretary of Defense to regional combatant commands. Recently, Israeli strikes killed Major General Mohammad Bagheri and Major General Ghulam Ali Rashid. They were respectively the heads of AFGS and the Khatam al Anbiya. They were respectively the heads of AFGS and the Khatam al Anbiya. Their deaths are likely to disrupt Iran's military coordination and command structure, creating potential confusion and delays in Iran's strategic and battlefield decision-making during critical operations. The Artesh, Iran's regular army, and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, are locked in a deep structural rivalry rooted in Iran's 1979 revolution. The Artesh defends Iran's borders with a conventional doctrine, while the IRGC, favored by the regime or the Islamic regime, leads the asymmetric operations and ideological enforcement at home and abroad. Constitutionally overlapping roles and Khomeini's decision to retain both have institutionalized competition, with the IRGC consistently dominating in budget, recruits, and political influence. The IRGC, or the Revolutionary Guards, control over economic assets, missile programs, and foreign interventions has made it almost like a parallel state, overshadowing the Artesh's limited modernization efforts that have been done. Artesh's continued marginalization, the continued marginalization, the continued the continued marginalization of Artesh under tighter civilian control and with second-tier recruits has actually reduced it to a secondary role. So what are the ramifications of this rivalry? That is something that we need to understand. For the Iranian regime, this rivalry ensures no single military power can threaten the leadership, but risks fragmented command during crisis. For adversaries like the US, the Israel, and the Gulf states, IRGC's dominance means Iran's responses will remain ideologically driven and asymmetric, complicating direct confrontations. Should the regime face internal collapse, IRGC's strength and independence may position it as the primary actor to control or fragment Iran's future, reshaping regional power dynamics in the process. So, what has really happened relative to the US strikes on Iran? That is something that we can look at now. Well, the US Defense Intelligence Agency, or the DIA, has found out that the three sites had extensive above ground damage, but the centrifuges remain intact. Most importantly, the enriched uranium stockpiles remain untouched, and those hardened underground vaults, well, they were unbreached. So, in reality, the strikes had set Iran back by maybe months, but not years. Trump's team denounced these findings as sabotage by the deep state, and later the CIA director Ratcliffe and DNI Tulsi Gabbard have reversed course, claiming that Iran's program was destroyed in a long term without giving any evidence. The satellite images reviewed by the media outlets like Associated Press and BBC have confirmed that there was surface damage, but enrichment capabilities survived. And also, there was no evidence of radiation leak. So, was this just a political theater? Because it certainly wasn't any kind of strategic victory as it was built out to be. Something seems completely off, doesn't it? Well, interestingly, something treasonous was unfolding behind the scenes. Amidst the bombing, Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy and father of Zachary Witkoff of WLF, who did a crypto deal with Pakistan, was busy texting Iran's foreign minister, Arabchi. He was saying this was a one-off strike. We are ready to rebuild your civilian nuclear program. And within hours, Witkoff offered Iran a $20 to $30 billion investment in non-enrichment civilian nuclear program funded by the Arab partners. While the bombs were falling, a deal was being hashed out. And Witkoff said, we were never going to have a forever war here. It was always going to be an incisive strike. And once we achieved our objectives, it was going to be over. And sure enough, it is. But was it? Just weeks earlier in May, Witkoff had declared an enrichment program can never exist in the state of Iran ever again. That's our red line. Their three enrichment facilities have to be dismantled. And yet, the facilities after the strikes were not dismantled. The centrifuges kept spinning, underground bunkers remained secure, and Iran's enriched uranium is probably intact. Witkoff had also claimed that we are going to take them at their word that they do not want a nuclear weapon. I don't think they are going to be able to manipulate me, said Witkoff. Really? Taking Iran at its word? No one has a worse record of lying and deceiving as the Iranian Islamist regime has. So when someone takes such a regime on their word, despite the much celebrated strikes not having achieved what they were stated out to have done, then you can expect that things will take a very, very different course. And in a further twist, Trump quietly eased the enforcement of sanctions on Iran's oil sales to China, signaling probably openness to rebuild Iran. And Witkoff explained this. He said, President Trump is giving signals to both China that we are not interested in hurting your economy, but in working with you, and a signal to Iran. And the message to China was that we won't sabotage your energy flows. And to Iran, it was that we are ready to deal, not just bomb you. And then 2 days later, under pressure from media and other forces, other groups, Trump reversed course publicly, and he declared that US would not lift the sanctions. So the question is, does US have a foreign policy, or is it one unhinged action and statement after another? For Israel, Iran's nuclear ambitions have always been an existential threat, shaping decades of policy towards their complete dismantlement. But Trump's bomb and deal diplomacy have all but shattered those assumptions by legitimizing Iran's nuclear infrastructure under the civilian label. It has eroded Iran's red lines and proved that US security guarantees can vanish overnight. Despite Netanyahu's public praise, Israel's response was swift and covert, accelerating sabotage operations inside Iran and probably preparing for some more strikes and trying to forge independent Gulf alliances without US mediation. So there is a trust deficit, right, which is now going to shape Israel's defense doctrine for the future. Israel will now view US commitment with a lot of caution, especially as long as Trump is there. They will be recalibrating strategy to handle existential threats independently. The fallout has entrenched a new mindset in America's allies and the supposed partners, say like Israel and India, where unilateral actions and regional alignments, not external promises, not external promises, the fallout has entrenched a new mindset in America's allies and supposed partners, say like Israel and India, where unilateral actions now and regional alignments, not external US promises, are going to be central to their survival. As geopolitical instability rises, both India and Israel recognize that they must act decisively and alone if necessary, prioritizing their security above everything else. Despite decades of crippling sanctions, assassinations, and relentless sabotage, Iran has not just survived, it has adapted and thrived. The hardened bunkers protect its centrifuges even now. The hidden stockpiles preserved its ambitions. Airstrikes are absorbed with calculated patience. Far from breaking, Iran has actually tried to gain global sympathy while keeping its nuclear dream very well alive. Now, Tehran moves with cold precision, unleashing proxies like Hezbollah and Houthis, and preparing cyber strikes against US infrastructure and aligning with Russia and China through the INSTC, the North South Trade Corridor, and the Iran China Rail Corridor to blockade American moves at the UN and IAEA. Some may believe that it to be Some may believe that it is defiance, but in reality, it is strategic entrapment. Iran seeks to exploit every fracture, every distraction, every overreach of its adversaries, all the while marching towards its own nuclear goals. As the world hesitates, Iran is going to regroup. It is Machiavellian to reshape It is Machiavellian enough to reshape its nuclear ambitions and arsenal, and it is ready to reshape the region on its own terms. The storm did not break Iran, you see, it refined him. The US finds itself at a crossroads now between two competing yet convergent interests as of now. There is Trump and Trump's hunger for money deals and geopolitical legacy to help him win a third term. Many believe that Trump may be actually seeking a decisive foreign policy win before his second term ends, so that he can actually look for a third term. He doesn't give two hoots for regime change or even Tehran's nukes. On the other hand, the military industrial complex or the deep state have their own agenda. This faction does not want quick victories and do not really care about Israel, even though they keep feigning that they do. This group thrives on endless wars, strategically controlled, resource draining conflicts that sustain the defense economy, and these military industrial complex groups thrive on. To understand America's folly, let us look at some of the foundational truths when it comes to dynamics between the superpowers and their proxies. There are two types of wars, generally. There is a proxy war, and these are the wars where proxies of the powers actually battle it out. A very good example was the Vietnam War, where the North and South Vietnam were proxies of USSR and the US. In the proxy wars, the democracies with space for people's resistance and activism get hurt more. The leaders lose elections, and that is what happened in the United States at that time. And then there are quagmires, that we would like to call them. These are wars where the superpowers start fighting the proxies of another superpower. Afghanistan in 1980s was a very, very good example. Ukraine is another one. In a quagmire, the power that fights a proxy of another almost always loses. So in this case, the United States has made a fundamental mistake. It has gotten into a battle with a proxy to start off. Going forward, it will be the goal of both Israel and Iran to push the US to bring boots on the ground. And they very well may actually do it. Why? Because Trump may want to make the deep state happy by giving them the long rope. Yes, the contracted soldiers and even US citizens will become targets, but the money, just like in Afghanistan, will be tremendous. The longer the war, the higher the profits. The result, anyhow, will be a quagmire in Iran and maybe America's Afghanistan moment of the 1980s. The Russia and China are watching, unblinking. They see an America bleeding in West Asia, trapped in contradictions it cannot resolve, while its alliances fracture under the weight of hypocrisy and chaos. They see a superpower distracted, reactive, and ripe for dismantling. They will not rush. They will use tools of patient empires, the procedural chokeholds at the UN and the IAEA, the backchannel vetoes, the quiet sabotage of the Western initiatives. As America stumbles, China will deepen its presence in Asia, testing US resolve in Taiwan and the South China Sea. And Russia, well, they will like to secure Europe's dependency on its own energy, tightening its grip on the continent's winter lifelines. And as Iran's oil flows to China, bypassing sanctions, the axis will strengthen, not with loud declarations, but with steady, silent encirclement. Trump's Iran gamble has laid out some of the bare truths. A US that is inconsistent, transactional, and hollow, at least as long as Trump is there. A US that bombs and then offers to rebuild the same enemy it swore to destroy. A US that prioritizes short term optics, personal deals, and fleeting headlines over the trust of allies who stake their survival on American promises. And the consequences are already unfolding as we see. Israel is reevaluating its blind dependence, preparing to act alone. India is quietly diversifying, hedging with France and Russia. Iran, far from being broken, is going to emerge as a defiant regional power. And China and Russia will gain leverage, reshaping the global order piece by piece. The empire does not collapse in an instant, you see. It unravels one miscalculation, one betrayal, one contradiction at a time. And while America plays for the applause, its adversaries may very well be preparing for the checkmate. So, what do we think will happen now? Well, the way it looks, in the next 3 to 6 months, the world will see the first tremors. Iran will try to unleash the proxies across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, turning the entire region into a slow burning battlefield. Israel will try to strike back from the shadows. Its covert operatives will try to dismantle Iranian assets piece by piece, and India will accelerate its defensive autonomy, quietly hedging against an unreliable America. And China and Russia, they will block the US at every diplomatic turn, testing resolve without firing a shot. So by 1 year, the stakes will rise. The Strait of Hormuz will choke, spiking oil prices and rattling fragile economies. And as the election year starts to come through, the domestic unrest will boil over in the US as Americans question endless foreign entanglements. And we have already talked about the situation in California. So the blue states will have it really rough. China will start probing Taiwan's defenses, and Saudi Arabia will try and eye its own nuclear options, igniting a regional arms race in order to balance with Iran. In 3 years, probably, the consequences will be irreversible. America's credibility will bleed out completely, one betrayal at a time. Iran will have recovered and done more, not just as a regional power, but as an ideological spearhead of the Muslim world. That is why they don't call it the Shiite state. They call themselves as Islamic State. The Russia-China-Iran axis will harden, undermining the dollar hegemony and rewriting the global alignments. And America, caught between ambition and delusion, will risk entanglement in yet another endless quagmire. We are not clairvoyants, and we cannot make any predictions. We are merely looking at the trajectory of the events and trying to foresee what can happen. Interestingly, the steps on that road have already been taken. So, what should the different actors do to save themselves? Well, India stands at the edge of a turbulent world right now. It must forge defense self reliance, accelerating indigenous programs from fighter jets to missile systems. It must expand strategic ties with France, Russia, and Israel, ensuring that they get the technology transfers as well as supply diversification. And while remaining in the Quad, India must preserve its own strategic autonomy, just like it has done in the past few years. The pressure internally from various adversaries will start rising. It will come to a point where PM Modi and his reputation will be targeted even more strongly. He now needs to invest in political offense and abandon the defensive offense posture that he has been taking. Israel must accept the harsh truth that Trump's United States is not the one that Israel grew up with. So America's guarantees are fragile. It must pursue its own independent deterrence, expanding missile defense and first strike capabilities. It must deepen covert operations within Iran, using precision sabotage to counter nuclear threats before they materialize. And above all, Israel must build deeper alliances with Gulf states rather quickly. That would help in creating a regional security architecture that reduces dependence on Washington's unreliable commitments. And if, and it's a big if, the United States really wants to survive the transition to the new world, then it must restore trust with Israel and India at least through clear, consistent policies aligned with mutual security interests. It must abandon contradictory strategies that embolden enemies and confuse the allies. Washington must accept that multipolarity as a reality, recalibrating its own engagements to avoid unnecessary conflicts while preserving leverage where it matters. Crucially, the US must avoid Iran's quagmire trap, invest in asymmetric, precise capabilities, not boots on the ground occupations that drain treasure as well as morale. But with Trump on one side and deep state on the other, that would be almost impossible. So, this is not just another conflict, you see, it's a major recalibration of the global power dynamic. History does not repeat, it rhymes. And the rhyme of that history is pretty strong right now with the present, echoing across deserts and oceans and markets. Those who see it will prepare, those who don't will be swept away. The game really has changed, you see. The world has moved. But are you ready? So, if this story has helped you to understand the geopolitical situation around India and the world better, please subscribe, like, and share. And do click on the bell icon, please. And most importantly, tell us in the comments, how are we doing? And where do you think Donald Trump's presidency will take the US? And what is the Iranian leadership planning right now? But more importantly, do you think the Third World War has already started? Please do comment below. And until next time, Jai Hind.